Good evening. My name is Molly Curren Rowles, and I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of Maine. It's my pleasure to welcome you tonight. We're thrilled that over 1,000 people have signed up for this presentation, and it's a very difficult time for all of us, and it can be easy to feel overwhelmed. But the best antidote to overwhelm is action, and so it means a lot that you're here and that you're leaning in right now. We know that Mainers always look out for one another, and the way that we can do that now most effectively is to exercise our rights to demand political change and accountability. This should not be a partisan time. The United States is not a place where civilians face armed, masked agents in our streets, and ICE's reckless actions and lack of accountability are making this country less safe and threatening our basic constitutional rights. We must demand that Congress stop ICE funding and bring the agency under control. For over a year, the ACLU of Maine has been working to support the human rights of all those in Maine and of immigrants in particular. What we've seen across the country are a range of actions against non-citizens, including continued scapegoating, dehumanizing language, and terrorizing of communities, lengthy detentions for people subject to removal, transfers around the country, for no purpose other than to separate people from their lawyers, their families, and their communities, the detention of previously admitted refugees, removals or attempted removals of people to countries to which they have no connection at all. And in addition, US citizens and green card holders have been unlawfully detained. Here in Maine, we have seen increased ICE activities yesterday and today. ICE has claimed they have 1,400 targets in Maine and that they made 50 arrests yesterday. For a deeper dive into all of our immigration legal work, you can visit aclumaine.org to sign up for an upcoming legal update on February 24th. Watching the news out of Minneapolis over the past week has been heartbreaking for all of us. When the government uses force to silence dissent, it threatens safety, dignity, and fundamental rights of all people. But we will not be bullied into staying quiet. We have the right to freely express our views without fear of censorship or violence. As we honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. this week, we encourage Mainers to carry forward his legacy of nonviolent action in the fight for justice. Our speakers tonight will cover a few key topics: what you can do if ICE shows up at your home, what type of warrants they may have, how you can protect your privacy and information from intrusive searches, and your rights to protest, observe, and record what you're observing. We have some amazing legal experts here with us this evening. You'll hear from the Honorable Joyce Vance, Senior Fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice and Professor at the University of Alabama School of Law. Joyce previously served as United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama. We also have the Honorable James Orenstein, currently an attorney with JAMS Mediation, Arbitration, and ADR Services, and an expert on privacy and surveillance. James is a retired federal magistrate judge for the Eastern District of New York, where he was one of the acknowledged national experts on the warrant requirement and electronic information. And we have Zach Heiden, Chief Counsel here at the ACLU of Maine. Over his nearly 22-year career, Zach has handled cases about the right to protest, the right to demonstrate, and the right to record law enforcement, among many others. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of Maine School of Law. Thank you again for being here and for your commitment at this critical time and for the work that we're doing. Please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask any questions as you think of them. We'll address as many as we can at the end of the program. I'm pleased to turn things over now to Professor Vance.
Okay, this works better if I can turn my video on. So y'all, I'm starting this off and I will discuss the basics of what to do if ICE shows up at your home or your business. Many of you will already be familiar with some or all of this information, but there are a few twists, especially at the end, so bear with me as I go through this. First off, you should know that your U.S. Attorney here in Maine, Andrew Benson, has issued a statement about how his office views community efforts. And this is great because it gives us a roadmap. He acknowledges, as he has to, that peaceful assembly and protest are our rights as citizens. And then he points out also correctly that violence, destroying property, or obstructing government activity are, as he puts it, not protected, or as ICE agents would probably put it, crimes that you can be arrested for. So this is all accurate and it's good to know, but the devil is in the details. And agents have a lot of discretion out in the field, whether or not prosecutors back them up after the fact, to decide what amounts to obstructing their activities. Look, we all saw that play out tragically in Minneapolis. I won't dwell on it. I'll just say that it always behooves you to act respectfully, to move slowly, to make sure that you don't do anything that they can seize upon to deliberately misinterpret, which is what we've seen on the streets in Minneapolis. So the U.S. Attorney says in his statement that anyone who assaults an officer will be charged. It's critically important that you understand that the threshold for what constitutes an assault is really pretty low. Assault just means an intentional act that places another person in reasonable fear of being harmed or of being contacted. In other words, the key here is that you don't have to actually touch someone in order to technically assault them. So that could mean that if you do something that could make a reasonable officer fear that you're about to throw something at her or to hit him, the U.S. Attorney could possibly decide to charge you. And that needs to inform all of our interactions with law enforcement. You know, this is the same thing that we teach in street law. Keep your hands visible. Move slowly. Consider narrating your movements. I am about to pull out my driver's license to show you, sir, so that there are no misunderstandings. But when it comes to the rules for the conditions under which ICE can enter your home or your business, we need to be clear on when they can do that without your authorization. We'll discuss those together, home and business. There's one nuance for businesses that's important. If you are a business, you cannot deny law enforcement access to your public areas. That means lobbies, stores, restaurants, they don't need a warrant to go there. But in private areas, that would be offices, kitchens, break rooms, and in your private home, agents need a warrant to enter unless they have your permission. So it goes without saying, don't give them permission to enter. Make sure you affirmatively state that you are not consenting to a search of your residence or private areas of your business if it looks like they're about to make a forcible intrusion. So ICE comes to your door, you don't open it, and you ask to see the warrant. They can slide it under the door or they can hold it up to the window or a keyhole. Do not open your door. The agents have to have a warrant signed by a judge, and I think this is the most important point. They must have a judicial warrant to enter your home without your consent. And we hear a lot about ICE using what's called administrative warrants. They can look like a judicial warrant unless you know what you're checking for, but that administrative ICE warrant is not enough to enter your home. So here's how you're going to tell them apart. Do we have a slide that shows the judicial warrant? I cannot see the slide that you're seeing, but hopefully this is a judicial warrant. Note that it says search and seizure at the top. It's a form AO 93 or something similar from the state, and the way you tell it's a judicial warrant is because you go and you look at the signature block and it should be signed by a judge. If it is not, ICE cannot come in. It must be a judicial warrant signed by a judge or they don't get to come in without your permission. And here's a little sort of a law school 101 detail. Make sure that you check the location to be searched. A judicial warrant will specify the location. And if they get the location wrong, if for instance it's not your address, if they mess up the number, or if they do this by description. I once handled one where they said sixth house on the left, and there was no sixth house on the left. It only went up to 5 houses. Invalid warrant, they can't come in, so it's worth your time to scrutinize the location too. Let's take a look. Do we have an administrative warrant that we can show folks? Hopefully we'll have that slide up in a second. But an administrative warrant, this is not a judicial warrant. You will not see a signature block for a judge to sign. This is a DHS form, and it doesn't satisfy the Fourth Amendment. It could be an administrative warrant, a warrant for arrest of a removable alien. I've seen different titling up at the top, but it's a DHS form. And if ICE shows you an administrative warrant, you do not have to let them in. You might see a Form I-20 or an I-205, but you'll see that DHS marking, and the signature line here, you'll see it's for an immigration official, authorized immigration official, not for a judge. No judicial search warrant, no entry. They can arrest the person who's named on the search warrant if they happen to walk down the sidewalk by your house, but they may not come in absent a warrant that authorizes them to enter your home. But here's the hard part. This is the real world we live in. What do you do if ICE or CBP busts into your house anyhow? First off, if they force their way in, say that you don't consent. Try to say it calmly despite the circumstances, but do not make any effort to stop them. Remember that in any encounter with ICE or other federal immigration officers, you have the right to remain silent just like you would in a normal arrest. Don't say anything. Sometimes you think that you might do good by explaining what's happening. Be very careful. And now that we've come to this part, I need to alert you all to a disturbing development that we've just learned about in the last hour or so. So let me tell you that the information I have is very preliminary and not clear. But the Associated Press is reporting that ICE is now taking the position that it can forcibly enter people's homes without a judicial warrant. Apparently, the AP says that they've obtained an internal ICE memo that says ICE officers are now being trained that they can enter your home with only the administrative order I showed you in order to arrest someone with a final order of removal. This is not the law as I understand it, and it is not the law that DOJ has historically applied. In the Obama administration, this was not the way they operated. We obviously live in a different moment, and until we can get a court to enjoin this kind of behavior, you should all be prepared for the fact that forced entry without a judicial warrant might be attempted. So let's make sure we know what to do if that happens or if ICE otherwise enters your home. Just a couple of quick steps. Make sure that if they show up, you stay calm, polite, respectful, do not give them any excuses. Verify the warrant. Make sure it's judicial and it specifies your home or your business. Clearly state that you are not consenting to a search. If they make entry anyhow, don't obstruct or interfere with agents. But do document what happened afterwards. And with this new news from the AP, this is going to be critical. Write down your recollection of events as soon afterward as possible. Make sure everybody on the scene writes their own recollection independently. Don't talk about it first. Just write it down. That's the best evidence that you can provide in court. And if you think that what has happened to you or a situation you learn about has something to do with this new policy where ICE is aggressively trying to bust out the limits of the Fourth Amendment, make sure you contact someone here at the ACLU so that they can begin to gather the information that they'll need to get into court. That's all I've got. I will turn it over now to Judge Orenstein, who will talk about privacy and information protection issues.
Thanks so much, Joyce. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to everyone at the ACLU for asking me to join in tonight. I hope this will be useful. So I'm going to talk to you about digital privacy. And when we talk about digital privacy, we're talking about recent advances in technology that have made it possible to track where you go, who you associate with, and what you say to a degree that was inconceivable for most of our history. So, for example, when I became a lawyer 4 decades ago, if an FBI agent wanted to know every place I'd been for an entire month or an entire year, he'd be out of luck unless I agreed to tell him. We didn't need legal rules about how the FBI could get that kind of information without my consent because it was impossible. But now I carry around one of these and I share all of my real-time location information with Verizon, with Google, Apple, who knows who else. And today, practically every detail of our lives is reflected in some kind of digital data that someone other than you controls. And the rules governing that data are still evolving and slowly. So there are a lot of angles to this issue. I'm not going to talk, for instance, about how a business can use your data against your will. That's not tonight. I'm going to talk about how law enforcement agencies can get your data and how you can protect your digital privacy, particularly when you go out to exercise your constitutional right to engage in peaceful protest. Now, I'm going to break it down into sort of three buckets of information and the different ways law enforcement might try and get that information and use it. First, there's the data that you possess and store in a device that you own, like a phone or a desktop computer. And that can include your personal journal, videos, photos, your emails and texts with others. And the rules about that, about how law enforcement can get their hands on your devices and what's in them, that's pretty clear. It's the traditional search warrant requirement. And that means before a cop can seize the device, she has to show a judge that it's needed to investigate a specific crime and that there's probable cause to believe that that evidence of that crime is in the device that they want to take. Um, and uh, Now, there's one thing important to remember about information on your devices. Just because the FBI gets a warrant to seize your device doesn't mean they'll be able to read all of its contents. I'm going to come back to that because there are real ways you can protect your data that way. Let me just first quickly go over the other two buckets of data. In addition to the devices you have, there's data about you that other people have. So that can be phone records, credit card transactions, what you watch on Netflix, what you searched for on Google, what you asked ChatGPT to do this morning. And also your past emails and texts. Your service provider has those and may be forced to give them up to law enforcement. Now, for some of these things, the rules are still evolving, but for the most part, it's safe to say that law enforcement still needs a warrant there, or at least some kind of order signed by a judge. With those, there's not too much you can do proactively to protect that part of your digital privacy because those orders, those warrants, law enforcement gets them without your knowledge, and often they get an order that says your service provider can't tell you that they've got the warrant. So that's not something you can protect. And then finally, the last category, it's a little, this is really evolving. If you show up at a place and a crime is committed there, and the FBI doesn't know who committed the crime, they could ask Google, hey, look at everybody's location, everywhere, everyone, you, me, everyone, and tell me which of those people had their phones in the place where the crime happened. That's a huge privacy concern. It's a real constitutional problem. The Supreme Court has just agreed to take up that issue and decide it, but right now we can't tell you what that's going to be. But getting back to the data that you have on your devices, here's some things you can do. First, before you go out, get a device with a password that the manufacturer doesn't keep. So, for example, on my phone, Apple has changed the way it makes phones now so that my password is kept on my phone, but Apple itself doesn't know what it is. And that means when law enforcement comes to them and says, hey, we've got this phone we can't read, help us get into it, they can't do it. Not without really rewriting all of their security code and doing lots of things that they wouldn't want to do. And hopefully the law stays this way. I decided one case like this that said the government can't force Apple to do that much to break into your phone. You can also protect your data that's on apps by using secure passwords. Don't use the same one every time. Don't use something that's easily guessed. Get a password manager that makes it easy to have a different secure password for all of your apps. You can also go to your device's settings, to the settings menu. There are lots of ways there you can customize your device so that it protects your data the way you want it and that's still convenient for you. So that's what you do while you're still at home. When you go out, if you can, leave your devices at home. If you want to have a phone or if you want to have a camera, get a device, a dumb phone or a track phone that has a camera, something that doesn't have your whole digital life on it so that if it falls into the wrong hands, now it's out of your control. If you do bring a device, whether it's your everyday phone or something you've bought just for the occasion, there should be three goals. One, minimize the data that you have on that device. Two, lock the device when you're not using it. And three, make that lock as powerful as possible. So let me break each of those down. The first one, minimizing the data. If it's not on your phone, they can't look at it when they get your phone. So you can, if you're worried about this and you're going out to a protest and you're going to bring your day-to-day phone, delete as much sensitive data as you can. If you've got a file there you don't want others seeing, store it on your home computer and take it off your phone. If you've got an app that connects to a cloud, like, I don't know, your Amazon, right? Your Amazon ordering, you can disable that or delete it from your phone so that if your phone is open, when law enforcement gets it, they can't then get into your app and see what's in your account in the cloud, right? So take those off your phone if you can. And third, turn off location tracking for your apps. And again, you have to go to your phone's menu, but each app has a setting. So you can turn off location tracking for all of them with one swipe of the finger, or you can customize it. But don't forget to do that. So that's keeping data off your phone. Okay, the data's on your phone. How do you protect it? Make sure your phone is locked when you're not using it. Now, if you've been ordered by ICE or somebody to hand over your phone, you're going to comply with an order. You're not going to resist that. But if you have the ability, you can turn it off and engage the lock before you hand it over. If somebody grabs it out of your hand, you can't do that. But you can still protect yourself by setting the phone's auto lock, right? So my phone, for my convenience, it'll go off only every 5 minutes of an activity. But if I'm going out and I'm worried somebody's going to grab my phone, I'll set that to 30 seconds so that after 30 seconds of me not using the phone, it's locked. And that means that there's a smaller window for somebody that you don't want accessing your data to get into your phone. And the third piece is making sure your security is effective. So a lot of people use, I do it myself, use a Face ID or a fingerprint ID to open up their devices. Turn that off before you go out to a protest. If you're using a 4-digit code, change it to a 6-digit code or longer. The longer the code, the less it depends on something that's easily guessed, the harder it is for law enforcement to get in, and your data is better protected. And keep in mind with the Face ID or possibly the fingerprint, you don't have to consent. If the agent grabs your phone, they can put it up to your face, and it's going to unlock. So take those biometric passwords off of your phone. And the last thing that you can do is set up your phone so that you can wipe its contents remotely. So like I use an Apple phone, it has Find My that allows me to see where my wife is and she can see me. Those things also have a way to wipe all the data off your phone if it gets stolen or lost. So set that up so that if your phone or other device gets taken or lost at a protest, once you get home, you can wipe that data and minimize the odds that your privacy is going to be invaded. So that's what I have. Hopefully, I'll have time later to answer some questions. But with that, let me hand it off to Zach to talk about your right to observe and record law enforcement.
Thanks so much for all of that. And thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Zach Heiden. I'm Chief Counsel at the ACLU of Maine. And I'm really appreciative that we have this chance to talk this evening. People are understandably outraged about what we're seeing in the streets and on the news and in social media. The largest and most well-funded law enforcement agency in the country is coming into communities wearing masks, using excessive force, and generally behaving as if they are not accountable to anybody. You have the right to express your outrage in ways that are protected by the First Amendment, and I'm going to tell you how. I'm going to talk about protests and demonstrations. I'm going to talk about the right to observe and record. And I'm going to talk about the experiences of people on the ground in Minnesota so that you're prepared for what you might encounter. starting with protests and participating in protests, one of the most important ways we can express our dissatisfaction with government policies is by participating in a protest. But there are some principles and restrictions that go along with that right. As a protest participant, you have the right to gather in public places like parks and public squares, march down public streets and sidewalks, hold signs, chant, sing, and stand silently. Your right to free expression is strongest in a traditional public forum. That's the legal term for places where, since time immemorial, at least in the Anglo-American legal tradition, people have gathered to express their views. Parks, public squares, streets, and sidewalks. Private offices are not traditional public forums. Neither are government buildings, even though they're owned by the public. Sometimes those spaces are available for protests and demonstrations, but it's not automatic. Here are some things that are not protected by the First Amendment. Destroying public property, destroying private property, engaging in acts of violence, issuing threats, engaging in acts of intimidation, or interfering with counter-protesters. If you're doing any of those things and try later to claim that you were doing them for expressive purposes, the First Amendment isn't going to protect you. Now, as Joyce mentioned, ICE has accused people who are protesting its activities of interfering with its operations. And the First Amendment does not protect your right to interfere with law enforcement. But ICE has an overly broad interpretation of what constitutes interference. I'm going to talk about that a little in relation to what's going on in Minneapolis. We have extensive materials about protests and organizing protests on our website at aclumaine.org. There's even more at our national website, aclu.org. And that covers participating in protests and organizing protests. There's never been a more important time for exercising those rights, and we're here to help. I'm next going to talk about the right to observe and record. The First Amendment includes more than just speaking and writing and chanting. The First Amendment also protects our right to gather information about what our government is doing in public and to record that information on paper, on camera, or on our phones. And the government, in this case, includes federal law enforcement officers. Every federal court of appeals that's considered the issue has found that the First Amendment protects a right to peacefully observe and record law enforcement officers who are engaged in their official duties in public. As one court noted, quote, under the First Amendment's right to access information, the public has a commensurate right to record, photograph, film, or audio record police officers conducting official police activity in public areas. Here in New England, there's an important case that clarifies that public areas is broader than the traditional public forums that I spoke about earlier. In this case, police pulled someone over into a private parking lot, not a public forum. Another person recorded the encounter, and the Court of Appeals said that's protected activity, even though the recording wasn't made on public land. It was in view of the public, and so the public had the right to observe it and record it. Some states have tried to regulate the right to record to make audio recordings under state wiretapping laws. Maine is not one of them. If any of you are tuning in from other states, consult your local laws to be on the safe side. Related to this, though, law enforcement may not confiscate your photographs or video recordings without a warrant, nor may they delete your data or demand that you delete your data under any circumstances. Law enforcement can order people to cease activities that are truly interfering with legitimate law enforcement operations. But it should be possible to stand far enough away from any immediate law enforcement activities and still have enough of a view of what's going on without interfering. Here's what to do if you're stopped while you're recording. Remain calm, never physically resist an officer. They're heavily armed. Police cannot detain you in those circumstances without reasonable suspicion that you've committed a crime or that you're about to commit a crime. If you're detained, you can remind the officer that taking photographs and videos are protected activity under the First Amendment and does not constitute reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. If you are a citizen in Maine, you're not required to identify yourself or to provide identification. If you are stopped, though, ask the officer if you're free to leave. If the answer is yes, calmly walk away. If the answer is no, you can tell them that you're asserting your right to remain silent and that you'd like to speak with an attorney. And you don't have to say anything else. Like Joyce was saying, when you get a chance, just as if somebody had come into your home, write everything down that you can remember from the encounter. Names, badge numbers, any other information about the officers involved. Take photographs if you were injured or document any damage to your property. I want to finish up with a brief discussion of what's going on in Minneapolis and a recent court decision there. In a case called Tincher versus Nome, it was brought by a group of people who had been subjected to violence, harassment, and arrest while attempting to observe ICE activities in Minneapolis. And the federal court in Minnesota just issued a preliminary injunction last week prohibiting further interference with those rights to peacefully observe and record. And we learned some important things from that litigation. First, the government repeatedly sought to accuse the plaintiffs of committing the federal crime of interfering with law enforcement activities, which is 18 U.S.C. Section 111. Forcibly is used in that statute, and the court noted that Section 111 makes it a crime to forcibly assault, resist, impede, intimidate, or interfere with a federal officer, and that forcibly necessarily modifies each of the listed verbs. So a violation of 111 would require some aspect of force or threat of force. Peacefully standing on a sidewalk, a safe distance away from ICE officers, is not forceful and it's not threatening. The second thing to know is that video records of the encounters themselves were critically important in this case. The plaintiffs in the case started out recording ICE activities targeting immigrants, and then very quickly were recording ICE activities of ICE trying to stop them from recording. The court relied on those records to conclude that the plaintiffs were peacefully observing and recording what ICE was doing, that they weren't interfering, they weren't impeding, they weren't threatening. ICE submitted a few videos of their own, in addition to a sworn statement from their Enforcement and Removal Operations Director. And the court said, Director Easterwood's account of what occurred are entitled to considerably less weight than plaintiff's declaration, and that supplementary videos do not provide meaningful evidentiary support for defendant's position regarding the incident. Now, that's a polite judge way of saying that what the government says and what the videos show don't match up. And the court is going to trust what it can see with its own eyes instead of the government's report. So the lesson here, I think, for you, if you're peacefully recording and not interfering, but ICE tries to stop you, keep the recording running. It could be useful in any future litigation. I just want to end by acknowledging this is a terrible time in our state, in our country. Participating in protests and demonstrations and observing and recording and bearing witness to what ICE is doing are critically important ways to register your disgust and also to build a record for political change. But there are many other things that people can and should do. Contact your senators and your representatives, call and write their offices and tell them how important this is to you. And also look in on your neighbors. People are struggling, it's cold, and these are scary times, but we're going to get through them. Thanks again for joining us tonight. I think I'm going to turn it over to Aaron to help with the question and answers.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you to all of you. Just looking here at the current number, there are more than 900 people or accounts logged on. That's so amazing. We hope this is helpful for you. We have time for Q&A. I'm certain that we have more questions than we have time. Just before we get to the Q&A, and by the way, please use the Q&A function. I see that the hand raising function is on, but we're not actually using it. Use that Q&A function, and we'll combine like questions. We'll try to get to as many topics as we can. Before we do that, real quick, I wanted to talk about a couple resources we'd love to point you to in addition to those that are already in the chat. So we have a new website this week with ILAP, Immigrant Legal Aid Project, and Maine Law. And that is at aclumaine.org/preparing for ICE. And there we have information available in English, French, Haitian Creole, Lingala, Portuguese, Spanish, and Somali on a number of topics if you encounter ICE, and resources for people who have been detained. We have our own Know Your Rights for interacting with ICE that is available in Arabic, English, French, Lingala, Portuguese, Somali, and Spanish. And you are welcome to share that. All those are available as PDFs that you can print and share with people if you so choose, or view them electronically. If you are aware of someone, if you know someone who has been detained and they need help, there is a form on ILAP's webpage at ilap.maine.org/detention. That is a project between us and them. You can use that form if you are trying to report a detention of someone that you know who needs help. And I wanted to mention two projects from MERC, Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition. They have an ICE hotline you may have heard about. That number is 207-544-9989 for reporting sightings of ICE and other immigration agents. You can call if you believe you're witnessing ICE activity, and they will ask questions, and then they dispatch verifiers. And there's also a resource hub right on the homepage of MERC's website, which is maineimmigrantrights.org. And that has, again, resources for families of those who have been detained, more Know Your Rights information for encountering ICE, mutual aid information, ways that you can either receive mutual aid like food or other assistance, or ways that you can help offer it or donate. So please check out all of those resources. I believe they will be in the chat sooner or later. And with that, we can start getting to some of your questions. So first, for Joyce, and most of these, probably all of you have expertise to answer them, so please jump in. We have a number of questions asking about what spaces are public, and some of the kinds of places that people are asking about are, is a nonprofit the same as a business for these purposes? If someone is a school classroom different from other parts of a school? Is the dining hall of a school? Is the dorm of a college, or the entranceway to a dorm? We even had a question about whether a school bus driver has an ability to make any claim about that space. So maybe we can't define every single situation, but could you say a little more about some of the ways that we could define what is public space that immigration agents are able to enter without a warrant?
Judge Orenstein is probably more definitive than I am, but I'll paint with a broad brush, and I'll say that they don't need a warrant to enter a public space. So if a dining hall is public access, they might be able to go in there. But a private space, a classroom, a dorm room, I think a school bus would qualify, requires a search warrant. And one way of testing this, quite frankly, I mean, lawyers like to slice and dice things, and it's all a line drawing exercise for us. But out in the real world, if you believe that you're in a private space, I think that it's legitimate to say that your understanding is that the Fourth Amendment requires a judicial warrant before they can enter, that you're not voluntarily agreeing to let them enter, and to ask them to show you the warrant. At that point, they may push it. They may say, no, our policy says that we can go into, whatever it is, wherever they're pushing the limits. But at least you've set very firm parameters that can be used if it has to be tested after the fact. But that's the bright line rule. Public spaces they can go into. Private spaces require a search warrant.
And continuing on that subject a little bit, we had a question about whether a rented apartment, if your landlord can they grant access to your apartment? And second to that is once they've ignored your Fourth Amendment claims and entered your property with or without the correct kind of warrant for the correct location, how should you document at that point filming voice memo, writing things down. If there's a search happening in your space, how can you best document that?
So as a renter, you have a privacy interest in your apartment, and your landlord cannot consent for you. A co-tenant can consent for you, but your landlord should not be able to. And so if it's a situation where a warrant is required and they somehow you find them inside of your house, they come in anyhow, you know, there's a real split of opinion on whether or not you should try to film. Typically, law enforcement will tell you, and they will be within their rights to do so, that for safety purposes, that they're going to sequester you, set you aside, and you should be compliant with that. Don't create problems. But if you can manage to set up a phone in a corner of the room and it's filming, well, go with God until they turn it off. What you should do is after the fact, you should sit down and you should record your memory as quickly and concisely as you can. Not the moment when you want to do that, right? But force yourself into calm, do that. Do not talk with the people around you, because if there is, let's say, a civil case afterwards suing for damages, you want to have independent recollections. You didn't all get together and cook up a story. Everybody wrote down their own recollection. And that can be fairly important, especially as these civil cases move forward.
Great, thank you. And while we're talking about what people might do with their phones, Judge Orenstein, there was a question about wiping things off of your phone. Is there a time in an interaction or a point at which that is a form of obstruction, or could be considered obstruction by law enforcement?
Sure. At any point where, sorry, I don't know what happened to my screen just there. At any point where law enforcement could reasonably say, hey, this person knew that the data on their phone was evidence in our investigation. At that point, if you wipe it off, you're obstructing the investigation. So the ability to wipe it off is at its strongest when you haven't had any interaction with the agent yet. If it's started, but they still haven't said anything that would indicate that you're under investigation, that your phone is relevant to that investigation, you still have control over it. It's still yours. But once they say something that lets you know that that data is actually part of the investigation, you have to leave it alone or you're risking prosecution.
Great. We're getting a lot of questions about where cars stand as property. I think this partially has to do with observation, but it also is if you are in a car and approached, where are those lines in terms of, do you have to open your car door for agents? Do they need a warrant to enter your car? So if anyone wants to speak to what your obligations are as a driver. And then also, I should say, we also had questions about, again, at least in Maine, whether passengers have any obligation, whether the driver has different obligations from passengers of the car in terms of producing identification.
I'll start with the warrant part of it. So your car is a private space, and FBI agents would come to me asking for warrants to search a car. But there's a big asterisk to that, which is cars are mobile. And there's a whole body of Supreme Court law that weakens the protections for cars, not so much for being searched as for being seized. And in other words, because the car is mobile, if it's relevant to an investigation, the bar is a lot lower for cops to say, you can't drive this away, we're keeping it. And once they have it, they have a right technically to inventory what they've got to protect them against later claims that they grabbed something and kept it. So there are ways in which there are fewer protections for the contents of a car, but at the bottom, it's still a Fourth Amendment protected space.
Thank you.
This is Zach. I'll just add on. This is an issue that came up in Minnesota in the Minneapolis litigation, that people were following ICE officers in their cars, and the courts wasn't quite comfortable saying that was protected activity, that was sort of consistent with the right to record or right to observe. The government's arguments were that people, when they were doing that, were driving erratically, they were driving dangerously. The court didn't rule it out, that it was always not protected activity, but they weren't quite comfortable saying that that was, coextensive with this right to record and observe. So I think anytime you're driving, whether you're driving because you're um, looking for government activity or you're just driving, you should try to be safe, try to drive and not to drive erratically. But that can come up in previous places where people were trying to determine where ICE was conducting its activities.
I'd just like to jump
Oh,
in
go
with
ahead.
one last thing. Keep in mind, your home can't be used as a weapon. Your car can. And
Mhm.
that's going to give agents a reason to say, to be more active in limiting what you can do with your car and
Mhm.
getting into it, getting into your car if they think there's a basis for saying they're in danger.
Thank you. For those who are out of their car, we have a few questions about whether there's a legally defined distance from law enforcement that makes you not interfering, and indeed also whether you can combine recording with yelling and swearing. I think those were the words in the question at law enforcement, whether that becomes harassment in a way that overrides the rights, Zach, that you can probably tell us about.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all probably have answers to this. Yelling and swearing are both protected under the First Amendment. There's a great case if reading Supreme Court cases is something that you're interested in called Cohen versus California. You can find it on the internet about the right to swear. Um, and but to the more germane question of how far back, I think you can ask. If you think you're observing from a safe, comfortable distance and aren't interfering, but the officers feel otherwise, you can ask where would be a better place for you to stand. They may say New Hampshire, but between that, in that dialogue, you should be able to find a place that allows you to safely observe without interfering in any way. I once had a case where somebody was across a street on a sidewalk, and they were observing, they were recording, and the police felt that that was too close. But ultimately that case was resolved in favorably. So in the plaintiff's favor. So I think it's a matter of the context and the situation. But it's certainly okay to ask calmly of the officers on the scene. I do want to acknowledge the irony, though, that the three of us have all repeatedly said to remain calm and do things calmly. And who is it that's telling ICE to remain calm and go about their business calmly? And who's, why is that? Why are you the ones being told that you have to remain calm all the time? And you may feel that that's bullshit, and you would be right. But it's still just a matter of trying to exercise your rights while staying safe.
Aaron, can I just add to that? We've
Please.
seen in Minnesota instances of ICE agents giving conflicting orders to a person. For instance, someone being told you need to leave and don't move at the same time. And again, just piggybacking off of what Zach says, I think it's critical to force yourself to stay calm in these situations. And look, not legal advice, just common sense how this plays out. It's easier to discount someone who's yelling and swearing. I get the desire to have that reaction. So much better if you remain calm and logical. And if you again narrate what's happening, some of these agents are going to be wearing body cameras. There are going to be a lot of people with their phones out. Narrate it and say, you're giving me conflicting signals. I can't do both of those things at once. I need one of you to tell me what it is that you're requiring me to do so I can comply. This is a real problem, and I'm just going to say the quiet part out loud. It appears that ICE is using this as a deliberate strategy. And so it forces us to be smarter and to evolve, and for us to be the ones who are actually de escalating. which is what ICE agents are supposed to be trained to do, what all federal law enforcement should be doing in these situations, but it now falls on us to be the adults in the room.
Right. And to name just a few more resources, and we do have time for more questions, there are some de-escalation trainings going on around Portland. You can probably find by Googling or possibly through the Merck site that I mentioned. And there's also, we're having some questions about some workplace stuff. And there is a great website from Siembra, which is a group in North Carolina, and it's fourth, the number 4, thworkplace.org. And it is a good starting point for information about the way the Fourth Amendment applies in workplaces, public and private space, for employers who want to protect employees and employees themselves. There is related work happening in Maine, but that's a great website where you could go sort of get acquainted with some of those ideas for folks who are interested in that before looking for some local resources. We have a really powerful question that's come up a couple times in the Q&A, and it's a little broad, but basically how minors are impacted by kind of everything all three of you have said. But if we could touch at least in a couple places on how a minor might interact with these ideas or might be targeted, or what resources they have or don't have if they're alone, I guess, encountering immigration enforcement. Or their phones are being, or someone is trying to access their information on their phones,
I'll
or any
talk
other.
about the phone part, the communications and data part of it. It's not in any meaningful way different rules for devices that minors have. But one thing that does change is that, if your kid has a phone and various online accounts, you have the right to change those accounts, to talk to the third party vendors who do it. So you have some control over how your kids manage their data. But in terms of how law enforcement can get their hands on it, I don't think there's any real meaningful difference.
The one thing that I'll say is that the federal government up until now has had a strict policy of not prosecuting minors. So if we're talking about citizen children as opposed to non-citizen children, for immigration removals, the laws are different. We've seen ICE repeatedly take children who are unaccompanied and take them into custody and put them into removal proceedings. But if it's, your kid who's observing an event, they should not be taken into custody. And if they are, even by state and local folks, they are required to call you and to have you, their parent or their guardian, be with them before they're questioned. So that might be something to talk with your kids about. Ironically, I was reading the other night about the Children's March in Birmingham during the Civil Rights era, where parents could not march because they would lose their jobs. And so their children marched out of their schools and marched in their place. That's what led to Bull Connor and the dogs and the hoses in Birmingham back then. Children as protesters, I think that we're at a moment where that's up to every family, but it is perhaps worth contemplating that federal law enforcement, at least until now, has had a hands-off policy on kids.
Thank you. So we've also had a question that is very Maine-centric, which is about how some of this, including Judge Orenstein, I think the electronic devices, but to all of you, I think in some way about our status as being in the 100-mile border zone, which hopefully folks know that all of Maine is inside of. Every point in Maine is within 100 miles of something that counts as a border, an international border. So if we could speak a little to that, and I will drop our Know Your Rights page about that in the chat.
Well, I'll just say I'm less certain that being inside of a border zone matters like it used to, because we've seen CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, playing a much more prominent role in interior enforcement in the last months, and their tactics are more aggressive than what we might have traditionally associated with ICE. Although, of course, it's all new these days. The reality is, though, that this close to the border, law enforcement has more latitude to engage in stops with less articulable reason. And so this is, I think it's good to review the know your rights in this area, but just to generally be aware that proximity to the border does give these folks stepped up ability to act, but they still have to have some reason to believe that people who are non-citizens are both here illegally and being transported illegally.
From a data privacy perspective, being within the border zone by itself, I don't think really changes much, if anything. What does change is crossing the border, because there are weaker legal protections for your data privacy on devices that you are bringing into the country or out of the country. On either side, they can have more leeway to search it. So all of the things I'd said about, how you protect your data when you go out to protest are also good ideas when you are crossing a border.
And this is Zach. Just to add to that, there's extensive material at aclu.org, our national website, about protecting your data when you're traveling internationally, especially when you're crossing borders.
So that actually brings us to just about our stopping point. I wonder if any of you have a closing thought, or I'm not going to demand that you end on a hopeful note, but if there's anything you're seeing, Zach, like that judicial order about about protest in Minnesota, or anything else. But again, no obligation to be hopeful here.
This is Zach. I'll end on a hopeful note, and Jamie and Joyce can join in if they're so moved. There is only one thing that is giving me hope these days, and that's all of you, the people that show up for Know Your Rights presentation, so that they can then show up for demonstrations, and they can show up for protests, and they can show up for their neighbors, the people who are calling our office because they're concerned about what they're seeing or what they're hearing. It is, I can't believe this has only been a year, but it's been the only thing that's giving us hope, but it is giving us real hope. And that's what's going to get us through this, and we will get through this. It's all of you and the people that show up. So thank you for that.
I echo Zach about what gives me hope. It really is all the people who are fighting for each other. The courts, I still talk to a lot of people who are on the bench, and a lot of them at the lower levels of the court, they are trying their damnedest to protect your rights. I can't say the same about the higher courts. But one message I would have is the law is not how you're going to solve this problem. It gives you some rights, but you got to get out there, you got to organize, you got to vote. Without those things, the law can only do so much.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say they wouldn't be trying to make it so difficult for you to vote if they didn't understand how powerful your vote was. And so we're all leading into that. Look, we know that this administration will attack voting this year. They will claim that non-citizens are voting. So what you're seeing happen here in Maine is likely going to play into that and be a part and parcel of it. So this is work that we will be doing from now through the midterms and beyond. And I'm the former law enforcement person in the room. I have enormous respect for law enforcement and for the men and women who try to protect and serve their communities. But when law enforcement does not do that, and when they violate their oaths, then as citizens, we have the obligation to call them out. And that's something that we can do in community for so many of our fellow citizens who may have either turned a blind eye or felt unaffected by all of this up until now. It's important to reinforce that this is not normal, that this is not what our Constitution provides for, and that as citizens, we're entitled to demand better by all lawful means, which is why it's so great that is it over 1,000 people here tonight, making sure that they understand their rights and how to protest peacefully. Peaceful protest is the key here.
Thank you. So thank you to the Honorable Joyce Vance, and to Judge James Orenstein, and to Zach Heiden, and to our Executive Director, Molly Curren Rowles, and our communications team, and all of our partner orgs. You can find us at aclumaine.org. for our resources for future webinars. Again, our partners at ILAP and Merck, this is something where it's all of our organizations together and all of you, the over 900 of you who joined us this evening, who will make the difference for our community and our state and hopefully our country. You can follow us on social media at ACLU Maine, and we'll hope to see you there and here and out in the community. So thanks again to everyone, and have a good night and be safe.